without the ideas that we carried into this life, in other words, who can decondition themselves and begin again. It's a little difficult to summarize all this. Those are big subjects.
That's okay.
So the safe place is basically a place where people begin a new society among themselves while the rest fades away.
So do you want to talk about a little bit about the parts of your book that concern the ETs? Because you talk about why the Greys are here and also what other ET races have to do with our future.
Yes, that's a big question, many questions in one. The Greys, from what I understand, are, I don't know how to say, like a subculture race. There are many races among the Greys, maybe as many as 60, 70. According to research I have, they are what one could call the fallen ones, or the archons. You know, the Gnostics wrote about all that. That's very well known. And they are hybrids themselves. Basically, they are, how do you say, they're not even humanoid, they are clones. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, they're not living beings, although they function, but they're not actually alive in the sense of they have no soul, for instance, so they have no purpose. I think the Greys, they're not a big subject to me. We know from very ancient teachings, thousands of years ago, that we just need to stay away from them. I think they themselves are a sub-race or a slave race, is maybe the better term, of the Dracos, of the reptilians, some of which live underground, some of which may be able to travel through the galaxies. I'm not so sure. There are other races out in cosmos who I think bred our race. The human race comes probably more likely from Lyra or from the Pleiades, from areas that have nothing to do with the Greys. But from what we know from teachings from other races like the Nordic Blondes, like the Pleiadians, there have been wars going on at some point tens of thousands of years ago where they already had interactions with the Greys. They already blew up certain areas in wars they had, and some of them landed here, in a nutshell. But you know, what you want me to say much about the Greys here is basically keep them where they are, be aware of them, but be careful in the sense that they are very smart, they're intellectually highly advanced, and they use this to deceive people.
And they're working with governments. Isn't it true that they're also working with governments?
Oh, definitely. The governments that are now in charge, more or less, of the world we have here are pretty much in the hands of the Greys, to sum it up. It's a crude summary, but certainly some of the Western governments, maybe even in Japan, I'm not 100% sure, but they are definitely in charge of the governments to the point where they can scientifically, physically make them fight with each other. So all the wars we have going on go back to the Greys. The one way we get out of this is if we have a direct contact with the other races, which would be the Nordic Blondes who already survived wars with them, or maybe this other race that I talk about in the book, which is not a physically touchable race, it's an other world like the Elven world, or the Shining Ones. And you have to be in touch with that almost vibration to know what to do or not to do. It's such a big subject, hardly explainable in a few sentences. I'd say we mustn't have any fear of these races. Let's put it this way, they will not make it through the shift. They will not make it through the dimensional shift. They know this, by the way. They are very concerned about how they're going to move on. And I think some of us will even be able to space travel before. What they cannot do is they can't leave here. You see, they're not actually extraterrestrials. The Greys are aliens in terms of alien, but they're from here.
Mm-hmm. So you know this because of your studies, but do you also know this because of some of your contacts in the military?
Yes, partly. I have not had contacts through the military of that. It's more through research, some of which is just my own experience, which is described in the book. That's too long to explain, but I have my own form of contact with a more invisible force, and through science, through guided science, where I just know what is more or less correct. And then a lot of it is research. If you really look through the old texts that we still have, through the research others have done before us, Sitchin is one, Jerry Zeitlin I mentioned, Anton Parks, Jacques Vallée. I mean, there's so many highly advanced searchers. Strieber has the whole grey part of the story, of course, well covered. He has now figured out what's what. So when we put all this together, plus our own little experiences, we know more or less what goes on. We know pretty much where to go, where not to go. Do try to work with that other presence that's always around you. Try to feel into what I call the invisible world, which is literally with us. You can grab it at times. At night you may see blue lights, structures, sort of floating forms. That's it. That's the ET world. The actual ET is there with you. That's that aspect. And then the message of the book in very short words is you decide. I say we are here for free will. We're here because of free will, and that's all we have. But because we have free will, we are very powerful. We're much more powerful than we know. And what these greys and governments, all this whole world wants you to do is they want to take away power away from you and have you feel like a victim at best, or at least powerless and disempowered. And I'm saying in the book, become aware of who you are, of where you came from, and wake up to that. Get into yourself and you feel where you actually came from and what is inside of you. Then you will be completely fearless and build a society regardless of what goes on around you. And the more things fall apart, the more you wake up.
Isn't it true that Krishnamurti has been quite an influence on you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. You could not be not influenced after reading Krishnamurti. I read many of his works for a number of years because I wanted to create a different kind of astrology. I wanted to explain it to people in such a way that they could use it and live with it. Astrology has been for far too long made ununderstandable so that people could not approach it. And Krishnamurti basically always said, don't build structures, don't build theories, and in essence he said, free yourself from the known. And he said, do not structure truths, you cannot. The truth is not known, it's always new, you have to live it. And so I tried to apply what he was trying to teach people over 50, 60 years into what I'm explaining to people that's going to happen over the next, say, 20, 40 years. My book goes well into 2050, even 2080. And Krishnamurti, for me, has been an influence in as far as I had to face also myself. I had to go into why am I here? What am I doing? What's the message going to be? How will I explain this to people? So in that respect, I owe him a lot because he was a great teacher. In the methodology, he had a way of showing people the way to themselves. But he had no method. And he said to people, and I have to say the same, you have to find out for yourself. There is no teaching. There is no method, no structure. There are no religions, none of this. You have to forget all about it. It's all in you. And each one has to find out for himself, for herself. So you have to be your own teacher and your own pupil.
So what are your plans for the future?
Well, the first thing is to create at least one safe place. I call it a center. It's a teaching center in the sense of an exchange center where I would like to have scientists